Good morning to all. I am Giulia Leghissa from the editorial board of the Build Up portal. For the ones who are attending a Build Up webinar for the first time, welcome. For our returning audience, thank you for renovating your interest. It is a pleasure to host today's webinar entitled Using ENERFUND to Identify Energy Non-Efficient Buildings, which is organized in collaboration with Cyprus University of Technology. Moreover, two other projects will be presented: SUSHI, the Sustainable Historic Districts Project, and VIOLET, an Interact Europe project. I would like to invite you all to contribute and participate in this webinar. You can ask questions by typing in the box on the right side of the screen. They will be answered at the end, after the presentations. You can also contribute to Build Up portal. Build Up is a collaborative platform in the field of energy efficiency in buildings. It is continuously updated and it represents one of the key sources of information on the topic of energy efficiency. You can register and become a member of the community. And you can also upload news, events, present a case study, results from a project, and so on. I would like to invite you all to navigate the portal. In the Learn section, you'll find all the podcasts of the past webinars, so it is possible to listen to all the previous presentations. In today's webinar, Alexandros Charalambides, Associate Professor at Cyprus University of Technology, will be doing a presentation of the ENERFUND tool. Then Savas Vlahos, Director of the Cyprus Energy Agency, and Maria Achilleos, Architectural Engineer at Cyprus Energy Agency, will present SUSHI and VIOLET projects. Now I would like to leave the floor to Alexandros so we can start the session.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introductions, and it's a pleasure to give today's webinar. The webinar today is entitled ENERFUND. It's about an energy retrofit funding rating tool that can assist the retrofitting of historical and other buildings. It was a Horizon 2020 project that finished a few months ago. And the primary reason for this tool, to design and promote this tool, is because at an EU level, we have identified three main problems when it comes to the deep renovation of buildings. Primarily, the public expectations and their lack of awareness and mistrust. Energy efficiency is not part of their everyday life. So they're not familiar with the solutions, and they always see mistrust. There's a mistrust whenever there's something new, and they will rather stick with what they know. On the other hand, there are not trustworthy or financially sound retrofit opportunities. This came out from the fact that it might take 20 years to pay back one of the measures on energy efficiency, and the public is not willing to spend that money and wait 20 years for a payback period. And the third problem is the provision of funding incentives and investment, where both municipalities but also banks did not know where to put their money. Where shall I invest? In which area? In what kind of technologies? And so on. And a combination of these three reasons resulted in low levels of deep renovation across Europe. So ENERFUND, it's a project, sorry, it jumped one slide. Okay, it was a partnership between 13 countries, and the partners you see here, a combination of universities, energy agencies, but also interested stakeholders across Europe to address this problem. How do we increase the rates of deep renovation? And we believed, and we have shown this over the last few years, that with the creation of ENERFUND, rating and scoring buildings based on their deep renovation potential it's beneficiary to many stakeholders. It is relevant to funding institutes because now they can provide targeted loans. It was useful to retrofit companies because now they can identify sound opportunities of where to focus their actions. It was relevant to municipalities because now they have aggregated data of what's happening in their own area, and they can promote targeted incentives based on the feedback that they receive. And also, this transparency enable the public to have a higher trust when it comes to energy retrofitting. Now, having identified the problem and who might be interested in using the tool, we created ENERFUND. It is a basic tool, which I will showcase in a while, that relies primarily not only on data from energy performance certificates that are available throughout Europe, but also on other set of criteria, as I will explain in a while. The main principle of ENERFUND is that everything will be open sourced so that anyone can use. It should be easy to use. It should be adaptable and flexible to any kind of data so that possibly in the future it can relate not only to buildings but to other categories of energy data. And the most important thing is that it had to be geocoded and displayed on a map. That increases its efficiency and adaptability and uptaking by the public to a great extent. So basically, we wanted to go from what you see on the left of your screen, which was massive Excel files, massive CSV files, and so on, into an easy-to-use online map of energy data. We were able to map, my apologies for skipping. We were able to map about 8 million EPCs across Europe. And depending on the country, we have about 80 million unique building data. As you can see, some countries are more advanced, for example, Ireland, the UK, Netherlands, and so on. And other countries like, unfortunately, Cyprus, the number of EPCs we have is quite low. And I want to stress again at this point, all of this data was acquired, it was open data, and we got them from competent authorities. And we wanted to make sure that we will be able to maintain this map, to maintain this tool after the completion of the project so that we can offer up-to-date data. Now, depending on the country, we're able to collect different kind of data. For example, this table shows all the data we're able to collect. And apart from the current rating, the potential rating of a building, and the ENERFUND score, which is something I will talk later on, which created, we're able to create, in some cases, wall energy efficiency, windows energy efficiency, and so on. Also the size of the building, the type of the building, when it was constructed, and in some cases that data came in an aggregate data. So within the context of today's presentation, the building type and the construction year are very important because you can identify buildings that were maybe built before the 1900s, so that you can focus on that. So the example we're going to use is from Ireland, where we have one of the most complete data sets, basically in the UK and Ireland, where we also have the current rating, the potential rating, but also the building type. So how does ENERFUND work? First of all, you choose the country you want to focus. Then you have a set of filtering parameters based on your own set of criteria. I want historic buildings. I want schools. I want buildings that can go from a low energy efficiency all the way to a B rating so that they have a high efficiency. And then based on the outcomes, you can save and produce a report based on the results. Now, what kind of data did we manage to collect? Unfortunately, this depends, as I said, on each country. In countries like Ireland, we have a complete data sets. In other countries, we might only have a few things. As you can see here, just to repeat them, we have the current energy, the potential energy, all the way to floor area, year of construction, and so on. So if we can go to Chrome so that we can show a demonstration of ENERFUND with Ireland. If a build-up can go to Chrome, perfect. So yes, if we, yes. Okay, so this is a map of Europe, and so there will be a time delay because of the presentation, so please allow this small delay. You can see a list of all the countries that are populated on this map, on this tool. As I said, the way ENERFUND was built, we can easily add any other country and any other data without a lot of hassle. So if we go for Ireland, and we press go, the map will focus on Ireland, and now you see a map of every single building that has an EPC in Ireland. The dark green dots show that we have an energy efficient building, and the red dots show that we have an energy non-efficient buildings. And by going on the right, we can expand the menu. We can filter based on address, so you can pinpoint your street and find your own house as well. But in this example, let's focus on, I only want to retrofit buildings that are, so let me make sure that it works through the presentation, of rating E, F, and G. And that will allow me to only see the energy non-efficient buildings. And by clicking filter, that the map will show me only these kind of buildings. So you can see where they are situated, in which cities, and so on. Now, if I scroll down, I can choose from efficiency of different parameters, goal energy efficiency, and so on. I can go down and choose on main fuel type. So I can choose what type of fuel type do I want to filter by. I can go by area, and I also can go by building type. Depending on the data we have for that country, this varies. So in some countries, we might not have the area, so this will not show. So I will choose buildings that are more than, let's say, 240 square meters, and I will filter again. And that limits me as well. And if I go down, I can see all of the buildings. So in some cases, you have historical buildings labeled if that's was available in the country. In some other countries, you can do that from the year of construction, where you can focus in that building. In this case, I will choose, for example, hotels, just so that I show you how it works. And now I can see all the buildings, all the hotels that are more than 240 square meters in the whole of Ireland that are in the category of E, F, or G when it comes to energy efficiency. And now if I want to zoom in now in the map to get more data about these buildings, and as I said, in the same way you can do it about any kind of age of buildings, depending on the category that each country has. Oops. So in this area in Galway, we have these two buildings. That if I click on them, please allow it for some time to load. This is a building that's category G. So when I click on it, you can see here at the bottom part of your screen, it says one building to compare. And if I go to the second one as well, please excuse me because there's this slow response time between my computer and the presenter's computer. So this is an F building. So now I have two buildings to compare. And if I open the menu on the bottom of your screen and I click on compare, then I can see these two buildings. I can see where they are. So I have their postcode. Not in every case. For example, you see in this building, I do have the postcode, but not in the other one. I know their full address. The category, as you said, is a hotel. Let me just zoom here a bit so that you can see both. I can see their total floor area. So I know that they are 2,500 and 1,800 square meters and 2,500 square meters. And I can see a few more of their data, and I can also see the year of construction. So for example, if I now want to focus on historic buildings, I can also filter for year of construction before the 1900s, depending on each country. Now, the extra thing that we have developed over the duration of ENERFUND is the ENERFUND score. As you can see at the bottom, one of them is rated 82.6 and the other one 69.1. The score, it was developed based on a methodology and the formula that we have developed, and all of it is public on our website, so you can see how we developed it, that not only takes into account the energy efficient of the building, but also on other unrelated to the energy part of the building data, which could be noise level of the area, economic activity of the said area, and so on. Obviously, in countries like the UK, where they have a lot of open data, that was a lot easier to collect this kind of data. In other countries, unfortunately, the worst example is Cyprus, such data doesn't include, so a default parameter was given into the tool. So in this case, you can see that, for example, the first building has a higher score. That means it has a higher potential to be retrofitted and for that to be made profitable for an investor. And that investor could be a bank that will put in the money. It could be an ESCO that's going to do all the renovation itself, but to anyone else who might be interested. So if we can now go back to the presentation, see if I can do that. Now, you can play with the tool as well, and if you have any questions, you're more than free to email me about it. And as I said, in some countries, I would urge you to try it out for Ireland and the UK and Denmark, where we have a complete data set. And if you're interested of how this can apply for historic buildings, but any buildings for your location in your country, let us know. And from the duration, the main outcomes basically of this project is that it's an open source, fully dynamic, user-friendly online GIS application. It can be applied in any country, in any kind of data, and it was developed after we analyzed the outcomes of all the existing initiatives funded by the European Union. doing extensive market research of what companies want, financial institutions, and so on. And as part, part of today's seminar as well, is we promoting it as much as we can. Now, some few features that we want to develop in the future is to be, from what basically the stakeholders told us that they would like to see at the later stage, is the drag and click selection process, so that you can select the area that you want to investigate, is to be able to export the data, because we're talking about 1 gigabyte of raw data, so it's not something we can send over email or anything like that, is to be able to print custom reports based on your interest, include more kind of data like noise levels, average renovation costs that now are available in some countries, and to be able to aggregate the data by postcode or street or at a specific area, and to be able to correlate this EPC with even more data. And one thing I forgot, my apologies for this. If we go back to the tool, so that I also show you the aggregation, even though it might not be that relevant if you're looking for specific buildings. But for example, in the case of France, I know Romania is better. This is a tool that was useful for municipalities, and the municipalities asked for this tool compared to the other funding bodies or ESCOs, is to be able to see the average rating of the buildings I have in my country or in my region. And this will allow me for targeted incentives in the different municipalities in the different areas. Where I see, for example, in the map of Romania here, green or dark green, it means on average have good buildings. So there is no need to do incentives in those areas. Where I see red or dark or orange, I should focus and see why are the buildings in that area in such a state. So going back to the presentation, my apologies. Okay, some policy recommendations and some of the problems we found is that not every country has open data, and not only when it comes to the energy performance certificates, but to a vast area of energy data is not open access. So people and the public cannot use it. And even if the data is open access, it's not geocoded. So it took us more than a year to be able to code all of that data and pinpoint it on a map. Many of the databases were outdated, so they could not be used in conjunction with EPC data. Other one of those is other energy related, my apologies, other energy related data, it doesn't even exist. So we need to have transparent data urgently. If we are going to achieve our targets, especially when it comes to the national energy and climate plans, we need transparent, available data. We also need to align the work being done with energy data with the Inspired Directive. Geocoding should become compulsory within all EU directives, all EU programs, and so on. And one of the problems we saw in some of the countries like Austria and Slovakia is GDPR. Some officers were afraid to share the energy data of buildings with ENERFUND because they were afraid that this might be under GDPR. And we have talked with the EU Commission, and this is not the case, but guidelines should be issued. So this is what I wanted to show. If you would like any more information, feel free to contact us or follow us on our social media. And thank you for your time. And I will pass you over to Savas and Maria for them to present their projects on this topic. Thank you for listening.
I would like to have the access to the presentation. Okay, hello everyone. This is Vlahos from the Cyprus Energy Agency, and also right next to me is Maria Hilios, my colleague, who prepared a very interesting presentation for you on traditional buildings and how to those buildings. So first of all, allow me to say a few things about the Energy Agency. It's a non-profit, non-governmental organization established 10 years ago in Cyprus, and our vision is to contribute actively to the conservation of energy resources, the protection of the environment, and the improvement of the quality of life here in Cyprus. And we are a small but dynamic team of 10 people with different scientific backgrounds and knowledge on various climate change related subjects. And Maria is one of my colleagues, and she's now ready to present to you about the two projects.
So good morning everyone for me as well. I think most of you know that it's always difficult to choose the first slide of your presentation. So taking down all the work that has been we have been done during the 3 years, as the first slide I have selected the main objective and that brought us all here. So it's the European Union's energy and climate targets for 2020, 2030 and 2050. But I'm only going to mention 2030 because it's what is going to come. So we have a reduction of about 40% in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels, an increase of 32.5 in energy efficiency, 32% increase of the share of renewable energy sources, and 12% increase of the renewable energy sources in transportation. So we have a new European Directive since 2018, which needs to be transposed in national law by March 2020. A very interesting part for us and the projects that we are working on is the paragraph 18, which states that research into and the research for new solutions for improving the energy performance of historic or traditional buildings should be encouraged, but at the same time we need to be careful in order to preserve our cultural heritage. And this is really important for us because approximately 2 years ago we started working on Biola Project, an inter-Europe project which has as a main challenge to create buildings, historic buildings that they have improved energy usage and reduced carbon emissions, but without endangering their architectural heritage. We set some parameters, so we considered that the best approach is to have a multi-sector approach and an integrated planning, which means that we brought together teams from the cultural heritage sector and the energy efficiency sector, both also from research and technical partners. So the overall aim of the project was actually not to do pilots with specific buildings, but to go a step backwards and increase and improve the fundamentals of the energy efficiency of historic building, which is actually the regional public policies that we have in place. The main output of the project, which is actually this period of for us, is an action plan which will describe in detail all the actions that we need to implement in order to reach our targets. So during these 3 years, we realized that for the majority of the countries, at least in Europe, we have plans for mobilizing investments in the energy renovation of the existing building stock. Nonetheless, usually the traditional and historic buildings do not apply for these plans, since they are currently exempted from the requirement to meet the minimum energy requirements for energy performance. But we have some individual cases, some pilot projects, either because the owner requested it or because the architect wanted to implement some measures that show that the improvement of the energy performance and the thermal comfort of the historic building is actually feasible. But in every case, we need to take into consideration that is in an individual case, so we don't have one solution that fits all. In every building that we are trying to implement some energy efficiency measures, we need to take into consideration that these buildings are considered as an important assets for the cultural heritage of the area. Of course, when we are trying to promote policies that they are in relationship to the energy efficiency of these buildings, we have to make clear that there is no intention to eliminate any specific approaches or preservation legislations that exist. But it's also important for us to understand and to educate other people that the usability of these buildings is really important for their preservation. We have seen buildings that they are habited, that they are able to be preserved and maintained at better conditions. So what we did at the local level is that we choose to work and set the basis for our action plan to the new directive of the energy performance of buildings and the national adjustments. So having in mind all the work done through the Biola projects and through other projects, we have participated in the public consultations for the law in 2019, this year. And specifically, we have set down proposals in regard the Annex 2, which was the annex that stated that a specific type of buildings, among them the listed buildings and the ancient monuments, are excluded from the energy performance requirements and the obligation to have an energy performance certificate. What we have suggested is actually for buildings that they are either listed or ancient monuments, which means they are under protection, they don't need to be accepted from having an EPC, an energy performance certificate, when they will be sold, rented, or if they are public buildings. We had some thought about to make mandatory the EPC when we have restorations, but that was a step that it was deemed more suitable to be leave for the next steps. So we have also suggested, in the case of listed buildings or ancient monuments, because those are the two categories in the national law that they are protected with specific criteria and specific financing schemes, to be able to have the exception of meeting the minimum energy efficiency requirements, not by default, but only when the competent authorities certified that any action targeting the energy efficiency of these buildings will alter their nature or appearance. So it's the first time that we reverse the process and we request for the competent authorities to state why no instead of why yes. Furthermore, at this phase of the project, we are currently waiting for the draft regulation to be sent to the cabinet and then for approval to the parliament for voting. So we are expecting to have the results in the next months, and hopefully we will have some better, some solid results to present on the next stage. In addition, it's not only policy in terms of regulations and national legislations. We also have some different approaches or some different initiatives that they are having the same aim, the energy efficiency of historic buildings. There are a lot of more than those presented here, but we just choose the more representative examples to present. So we have the European standard actually, which provides guidelines for the improvement of the energy performance of historic buildings. And it actually shows how to start the procedure for mainly big buildings that they are considered as historic in order to rate if the energy efficiency is really important or maybe the cultural aspects are more important. We also have examples from like UK that they have specific guidelines from the government in order to address the energy efficiency of historic buildings. And we also have some conferences that are taking place, especially for this topic, the energy efficiency historic buildings. All the minutes and all the outputs are actually available from these conferences on the web. And then we have in some countries, regions, or even cities, specific tools that they can be used either by the owners or the architect in order to prioritize solutions for the historic buildings and the energy efficiency. And in connection to the ENERFUND that was presented before from Alexandros, it's actually something that it derived in our project as well. In order to convince for policy changes and to prioritize our actions, we thought it will be a good idea to set the baseline. And to set the baseline, we needed to choose specific buildings. So we choose historic and traditional buildings that they are either preserved under legislation or they are just considered as an example of traditional architecture. And it was also necessary to have a geographical distribution for these buildings in order to assess the climate conditions. And of course, we chose buildings that they have taken some energy efficiency measures, and both we have in our database both public and private buildings. We have chosen three indicative examples to present here. Is actually the first one is from a residential building. I think it's the only one in Cyprus and among the partners, which is actually a listed building and managed to have PV photovoltaics on the roof. So it was presented as a best practice actually. The second energy performance certificate is from a public building that is from the antiquities department actually. They are responsible for the restoration of this building. And through the project, they decided that it was important to take some measures because members of the Department of Antiquities are on our technical advisory group for the project. So having the inspirations from the project, they implemented some measures for energy efficiency like insulation of the roof. And you can see the results compared to another public building that they didn't have any measures for energy efficiency, but they took the restoration with just limited measures. But it's also really important to remember that when we talk about cultural heritage preservation, it's not only the buildings. We have a lot of things to take into consideration. So starting from what makes actually a city sustainable, we have chosen 9 parameters from the specific edition on sustainable cities that they mentioned that we have to have inclusive cities, mobility cities, low carbon cities, circular economy cities. So you can imagine the work that is hidden below a sustainable city. For these reasons, we have the 2030s agenda and the sustainable development goals. Some studies show actually that the cultural heritage is connected to 14 of the 17 goals that they have been set, but we are only going to concentrate on number 11, which is the sustainable cities and communities. And we have the key business themes addressed by this sustainable development goal, which is access to affordable housing, the investments on infrastructure, the sustainable transportation, the access to public spaces, and of course, as we talked before, the sustainable buildings. And I have just noted down, of course, they are more than these specific goals, but I have included the ones that connect what we are trying to do at local level. So one of the most important is the 11.4, which says to strengthen the efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, but also the 11.1, which mentions the affordable housing, and 11.7, which mentions the inclusive and accessible green and public spaces for all. So if we take into consideration the limitations of sustainable historic districts, we can see that they have some, they demand a specific approach. So in the present position that we are now, we have, throughout the project, we have realized that the built and natural heritage is actually under increasing threat due to rapid urbanization. We have the environmental decay, we have the climate change, and of course, in some occasions, we have lack of policies or suitable schemes that can result to a sustainable historic district. Of course, we need to always remember that the managing authorities are really, really important for the creation of sustainable historic districts, as they can adopt policies regarding the protection of cultural heritage. They can promote an understanding that culture plays a specific role in sustainable local development. But most important, we have to recognize that the historic districts most of the times can be key resources for economic and social development and innovation. So just a short example of what can be happen if we have a commitment from the upper levels. Here is the Oslo city of Norway, a northern city, that they actually, I have read a bit before the webinar, that they are actually close a big part of the city center and they transform it to bicycling lanes, and they put the pedestrians before the car. So you can see that a whole city can be changed if we adopt a specific policy and we work on it. But we have also the Mediterranean countries, which is a bit a different situation. So for us, we have worked and achieved to bring a project that is called Sustainable Historic District Projects. You might hear it as SUSHI. We don't use it so much, the abbreviation. But the idea of this project is to actually bring together 6 different cities with historic centers from Mediterranean countries to work on a shared framework, but setting out different priorities. And the idea is to adopt an integrated approach instead of responding to isolated changes. So for Cyprus, we have chose the historic part of the capital city, Lefkosia or Nicosia, the city within the walls, within the Venetian walls. And we have set 4 key objectives on how to make and transform the historic district on a sustainable area. We have set the participatory process as the step number 1. We have included the assessment of the challenge of the historic center. We have set the implementation and the natural-based solutions as a holistic approach in the historic center. And of course, we have set down the targets to raise awareness of climate change mitigation and adaptation among the citizens and also among the managing authorities. The idea, it was to create an inclusive Nicosia by 2029. So we have set a roadmap that will be implemented throughout the project. We will, it will be an active document building on it, and then it will be a final deliverable for the next years of the Nicosia city. So the first thought was to actually reactivate buildings and spaces within the community, but also from the community, and to put emphasis on the nature-based solutions. So if we need to put it on a procedural framework, we have first the community engagement, then the community participation. We have some open events in the historic center with the main purpose to introduce and rate MBS solutions in accordance to the citizens' needs. And of course, step is to establish our roadmap, the vision, to transform the city from the theory to the action. So we have set some questions in order to prioritize actions, because as we said before, sustainability is a really vast terminology. So we have set first the question to ourselves, how to engage citizens in the co-designing process for adaptation and improved life quality. And then we have asked how citizens actually, their views can be transformed to solid actions for adaptation and improved life quality. The project is now 1 year old, so what we have done by now is trying to activate the community engagement and the community participation. We have translated a specific questionnaire in 3 different languages, the common language that you meet in the Historic Center of Lefkosia. And then by using a specific tool, the place standard tool, which actually helps to prioritize solutions for a particular place or district and to evaluate the quality of this place. We have the first results. Actually, we have more than 200 participants by now, and the results are currently analyzed. What we are going to see is actually, if you use the spider diagram shown on the right image, is from one glance you can understand the major problems in the historic area. So by now that we have seen the first results of the questionnaires, we have understand that we have some specific areas like the care and maintenance and the public transport that need to be prioritized compared to other aspects of the place. So, sorry, just one final slide, both for you and both for us to make us think, is some available schemes for cities or bigger areas that have different criteria or different scope. Some of those are only applicable to specific countries. And it was actually the results of the Sustainable Historic Districts Project Consortium. It was one of the assessments that we have done. We have seen that there are more than 11 certification schemes that when we decided that we want to actually transform the city and choose targets and monitoring our actions, those can be used. I don't know if you have any more questions. That was the final slides from us, but please feel free to ask about the projects, or if you have any other specific question, or even for the sources, we can provide all the sources for the material that you have seen. Thank you from our part.
Hi, everyone. I saw there was one question, so I'll take that one question from, I do not see by whom. The question is, how long did it take to prepare the data set showing the status of the potential buildings? That depended on the country. In countries, for example, again, in the UK, it was very easy because the data is available to anyone to download. Now, what was hard with the data of the UK, it was that it was not geocoded. So the fact that we had a database of a few million of buildings was not useful. So it took us a few months of actually geocoding all of that data and presenting it on the map. Now, in other countries, for example, with the EPC data of Denmark, it took us about 1.5 years of negotiations between our Danish partner at the Aalborg University and the competent authority to kind of convince them that the open data that they had should be open data. And I know this sounds a bit strange, but there was a reluctancy to allow others to access this kind of data for concerns over privacy. But in the end, they were able to provide it. And then after 2-3 months of geocoding that data as well, we were able to display it on the map as well. I can see that there are also two more questions. I cannot. So the other question I can see is, will it continue to be implemented after the end of the project? Yes, the Cyprus University of Technology will host this data and for the next 5+ years. And we will also try to update it wherever that's feasible. But we are open to discussions with anyone else who might want to display their data on the map, so that we will be able to make it more interactive, because it will be shame to only display these 13 countries. We would like this to basically display EPCs from every country. And on the same note, we're discussing with Climate Kick, one of the bodies that Maria mentioned before, on how we can expand it to other regions as well. So yes, we are at this stage of where the tool will be maintained by the Cyprus University of Technology, but we're also looking for partners to put more data onto the map. And I can see another question. Sorry if you have already answered the question, but what kind of databases have you used for the assessment? I'm not sure if that's for ENERFUND or for the other projects. So if it's for ENERFUND, it depended on each country. Other countries had massive Excel files. Others already had CSV files. It depended on each country. Whatever they had, we kind of used. What we didn't do is to try to digitize data in countries. For example, in Romania, they have loads more data, but it's on paper. So it wasn't within the aim of ENERFUND to get that data, digitize it, and then geocode it. So it was usually CSV files or XML or plain Excel files.
Okay, I think there is a question for Violet. It says renovation of residential buildings, and specifically those defined as historic but with no protection, is key to achieve the EU targets due to the large amount of this typology in Europe. How will this typology be targeted in the project? That was actually a thing that we were discussing for more than 1 year throughout the project, because both in not only at local level but on partners level, we have a lot of buildings that they can be considered as traditional, but they are not currently under protection. So just to concentrate on national scope, because it was what we have done the assessment more. The idea it was these buildings can actually apply for other schemes for energy renovation. So it was up to the owner or the architect or the mechanical engineer to decide what needs to be implemented without having any alteration of the building's character. It was a long discussion, because half of them they were supporting that we have to have a specific scheme, and other people they were supporting that then a number of buildings in Cyprus that they are traditional but not under protection is not so big in order to have the impact and create a specific scheme just for these buildings. So the idea is now to move on the other direction. Instead of actually technical implementations, we have talked with professionals and professional associations in order to educate both the blue collars, the technical part, but also the owners, in order to realize and understand that they have solutions, and those solutions is not always to destroy the building or just to live in a building that is not thermally comfortable. So in the next phase of the project, we have suggested to actually have some educational presentations and in general to raise awareness and implement some actions through this direction.
In addition to Maria's answer, definitely we can see that at the European level there is a priority and direction to the renovation of existing buildings, and the traditional and historical buildings is they fall under this category. So the emphasis is given from our side is just to have specific supporting schemes addressing the renovation of the existing building stock in Cyprus, but taking into account these specificities and challenges that historical buildings or all buildings without any protection that needs to be addressed before taking any decision or grant to renovate.
Thank you both. Do we have any other questions?
There is another one question, I think is for you, Alexandros.
Yeah, what parameters are included? Yes, in the energy fund, in ENERFUND, the rating, there are two things that are being considered. When it comes to filtering, we only rely on things that the country has to offer, that are included in the EPC reports. For example, within the UK, we have the rating, the potential rating, fuel type, wall insulation, area, building type, anything. We even have the size of the door of the building. It might not be useful, but it's there. Now, when it comes to the ENERFUND score, not only we use the total area and the energy saving potential, which are the two main criteria, we also consider when the building was constructed, because if a building was constructed yesterday, it will not be renovated. If a building was constructed 200 years ago, you need to make sure that all the right procedures are being taken in place. But we also take the price for renovation in the said area. So we have data for the cost to go from a G building to an F, from a G building to a C, from a G building to go to an A building, based again on open data in each country. And we also have occupancy levels. It's different if you have a school that's being used 24/7, or if you have, for example, a theater that only works in the weekends, because then the potential to be renovated, it's higher, obviously, if it's in a daily use. Now, in some of this, it's automatically filled in the tool. Parameters, for example, like the occupancy level, someone will need to include this, add this to the tool. So now they're not active per se in the ENERFUND score, but it is included in the methodology. So if a user would like to add that into the scoring, they can do. So if you're interested more about it, please let us know by email. I hope that was clear. Perfect. Thank you as well. So any other possible questions? I guess that's the end of the question session. I don't see any other ones. No. So I guess back to the organizers now at Build Up for the next step. No, there's another question. Savas, this is for you, I guess. What will be the next steps that you have identified as necessary to achieve the EU 30 goals, but that you have not time to include?
Yep, thank you for the question. So these two projects presented address the buildings mainly, but also the cities. Definitely to achieve the EU 2030 goals, the cities will have a significant role. So we don't have time to mobilize cities, all the cities of Cyprus to move towards 2030 targets. But definitely beyond the project, we need to work on initiatives in order to contribute to these targets. Some of the initiatives is the Covenant of Mayors, which is a voluntary movement for cities to move towards 2030 targets and achieve more ambitious objectives compared to the states. So this is one of the priorities for the next years, and definitely we didn't have the time to work with this during the projects.
Thank you, Savas.
And Alexandros, if I may comment to the usefulness of ENERFUND, and during our experience with the VIOLET project, when our committee with stakeholders were working together in order to establish an action plan, definitely the issue of having no access to data and a baseline for historical buildings and for buildings in general was a huge barrier. So we hope that if the developments of ENERFUND tool will be also advanced in Cyprus, that will help policymakers and other stakeholders to make the most appropriate plans for the future.
Thank you for the comments, Savas. No, I do not see any other questions. So, okay, if there are no other questions, I guess it's time for a wrap up. So I would like to thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar to know more about ENERFUND and SUSHI and VIOLET. And I don't know if Savas, do you want to say any closing remarks?
I would like also to thank you for the time given to present those two projects, and myself and Maria will be available for the attendees for follow-up questions and communication with us on the subject.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you everyone.